Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning. Thanks so much for being here. I just dropped a little note into the chat. Please go ahead and if you'd like to introduce yourself, where are you joining us from today? A few notes here. As we move through our workshop and presentation, please just add questions into the chat so you don't forget them. And then we'll make sure that we answer them at the end of our workshop. Um, we have dedicated time for that. Just a quick note on privacy. This is being recorded, so we can use it for our social media and send it to those who weren't able to make it. So please keep that in mind. The chat remains private. So without further ado, we are so glad you're here for this gathering, this moment of Pull Me Out of This by Sam. And today we're talking about AI and how it involves our work and how it might affect our work. Okay. So thanks so much for being here today. We're really grateful to be having this conversation with you all here today. Uh, Ultimately, it's just not being talked about enough, and we want to change that. AI and its effects and the truth of it all. The truth is, no one really knows. No one really has the answer. But talking about it together and coming together as women, as community, will help us get to some of those answers. And our voice is the most powerful tool we have. Joanna will probably agree with that. And so
Certainly.
so, so we must use it. We must be informed. We must be curious. We must be critical. All of these things are only going to help us in our quest. But let's be honest, shit's a mess. We didn't really ask for AI. We were fine with just Google. I mean, I was. I don't know about you all. Maybe you were dying for an AI solution. I don't know. But it feels like in 2026, things are just being thrown at us from every which way. We've got, of course, war. We've got the job market. We've got Jeff Bezos's newest look. I kid, but it's a lot, and it's not light shit, right? And AI is right there in this mix. And perhaps there are women here today who have been impacted by AI already, and we want to acknowledge that. But this particular moment with technology and the conversation feels a little bit different, at least to me. We all grew up with computers, right? I remember my first one was the Apple IIgs. I played Oregon Trail, Math Blaster. I learned how to code BASIC. And our first Facebook account, that was exciting, right? That was a big deal. That was a moment for all of us, and that continued for a long time. It felt cool. But fast forward now to 2026, we know what we know, how computers have moved us forward, but also backwards, how Facebook manipulated elections, how we learned the words online bully. So all of these things, pros and cons, good and bad, but AI just feels a little bit different. I don't know if that's a feeling that you have too, and we're going to talk about that. And it's a huge topic, right? Like it's huge. Joanna and I were brainstorming the structure of this workshop here today, and we are like, God, we could do 20 of these on all of the different facets that AI involves. And it's the size of the ocean, and we're not going to get to all of that today. Obviously, we only have 45 minutes. But really, we want you to think about how do we want AI to interact with our lives? Want is the word. What do we want as women, as professionals, as mothers, as community members? And that's not really something that we're being asked. And so we'd like to open that space for us here today as we go through the data, as we go through some of the facts and things to consider. What do we want? What do you want? So we're going to talk about AI of course. Thanks for being here and its interaction with our work, our careers, our blood, our sweat, and definitely our tears. So, without further ado, that's enough from me. I want to welcome uh, Joanna Mikulski. Joanna is the perfect gal to talk to us about AI. And Joanna is an AI advisor here at SAM. Um, we're really excited about this topic because we want to learn as much as we can in order to support women well through it. And Joanna is the expert in this space. She works in the intersection of technology and work. She's worked for not one, but two presidents at the White House in economic and labor policy while raising a daughter. She has a of public policy from Georgetown and a bachelor's from Notre Dame. She is currently advising entities on AI and the future of work, among other things. And before I turn it over to her, I'd love for you all to check out Sam when you have a minute at the link on the screen. Today's workshop is just a small taste of what we are serving up on Sam. So, Joanna, I will send it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Abby. It is really a pleasure to be here today and to be supporting Sam. I think this is an absolutely critical topic. And, I think to piggyback on what you're saying, I think that AI is getting a lot of attention, but we're really only hearing from one set of folks about it. And it's time to expand the conversation. So maybe, Abby, if you go to the next slide. So, if you're in the chat and just want to put in one word or a phrase about how you're feeling about I'd invite you to do that. When I think about how I feel about AI, I will just put it out there. I'm pretty ambivalent. I think it does some really great things. To be upfront, it really helped me with research. It helps me find things much faster. A lot of my work is helping to develop very complicated strategies around workforce and economic development and looking at public funding. And it can be really a phenomenal tool. But I also have a lot of concerns, as we'll talk about how it's being used, what it means for our working lives, and frankly, what it means for us as human beings and how we think, how creative we are, how we problem solve. So it looks like we've got anxious and behind as two entries in this in the chat. I welcome more. Hopefully
I'm
by the
happy
end
to
of that, you'll
share. I'm happy to
yeah.
share. I mean,
Please,
you already
Abby, share
heard
too.
Rebecca. I'm very concerned. I mean, I think I'm very concerned. I'm erring on the side of very concerned. I am less curious than I used to be. I also spend a lot of time learning about it, right? So I think that is affecting.
Yeah. All right. So we have pissed and concerned, grateful and very concerned. I'm feeling this very we got both sides of the debate here. So let's get moving and dive in. The next slide. So the title of the slide is Yep, it's complicated. It definitely is complicated. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that there is a real difference, a real gender dimension to how people are approaching AI and how they feel about it. Generally, if we look at the data that we have now, women are more skeptical about AI than men are. But on the whole, I would say that Americans, men, women, whatever your gender identity, they are pretty worried about AI on balance. About half believe that AI will negatively impact our ability to think creatively, solve problems, have meaningful relationships. I think there's a real representation issue here in that women comprise less than a third of the AI workforce and only about 18% of AI researchers. And so, as I said up at the top, I think we're hearing a lot about AI, but it's not necessarily representative. So that takes us to our next slide around, and maybe actually, Abby, if you want to jump in here too.
Well, okay, two things come to mind when I see this slide. I see, well, one, I see problems, and opportunities. And two, um, we'll start with one. And I want to go to the last one here. Women
Hmm.
comprise less than a third of the AI workforce and only 18% of AI researchers. Women are
Hmm.
also underrepresented in AI training, 28% of global enrollments.
Hmm.
When we talk about being at the table, we're not. We're not
Yep.
yet at that table, right? And so that is also likely a factor to feeling what we're feeling, anxious, maybe behind, concerned, right? Because we're just not there. We just aren't involved in it, right? Yet.
Yes, I think that's, how we want to change this. Yeah, I do think that what we see is a conversation that, there are very prominent women, right, in the field, as well. But the reality is that, as you can see from this data, the representation is a bit lopsided, which could be contributing to certainly how people feel.
We talked a little bit about this ahead of the call, but I'll share with the folks here. It would be interesting to see this compared to other technological advances that we've faced in our lives.
Hmm.
So what did this data look like 30 years ago with the personal computer or 20 years ago with social media, right? So
Hmm. Yeah, so if we want to, that's a good segue to the next slide around work. So what we are seeing is that while Americans, and particularly American women in particular, have some concerns about AI and are skeptical about it, uptake is quite quick. So right now, according to the latest data, over 40% of working age adults are using generative AI at work. That is faster uptake than we saw with the personal computer or with the internet. But I think if you also look at this data around work, you see some of the reasons, additional reasons perhaps, why women might be a bit more skeptical about this than men. One of them, if you look at this middle graphic, it is research from the Brookings Institution, where what they tried to do was identify workers, a group of workers who were both most at risk of losing their jobs due to AI, again, based on what we know now, which that's a big caveat, which we'll talk about a bit more in a minute. So, workers who are most at risk of losing their jobs and have the least capacity to adapt. So, why might they have the least capacity to adapt? They might have limited savings. They might be older workers. There's a range of factors there. And so then they came up with this group of 6 million workers who are sort of most at risk, and found that actually 86% of them are women. Largely because we'll discuss in a minute, there's high concentration in sort of like basic office clerical work, really in sort of knowledge work professions that have typically and traditionally been done more often by women. So, I think uptake is fast. Women who are out there looking at this, they have reason to believe, reason to be skeptical. So, yeah, I think. Anyway, I don't know, Abby, if you have any further comments there, we can go moving on.
well, I always have further comments.
Yeah.
I always have further
Let's have a
comments, and
conversation here.
yeah. Um, what are some of the reasons why we're less optimistic? Is it skepticism? Is it because we're reading the things we're reading? Is it we're seeing some of this translate in our work that we in ways that we don't like?
Hmm.
What can you speak to some of that, like the less optimism? Like let's speak to, I can name mine, right? But
Hmm.
what are some of the things that you're hearing?
So, I think for one thing, and we'll talk a little about this, I think there's a real dearth of good data that is not coming from people who have an agenda on this. I think Abby, when we were talking earlier this week, I think you've been sending me lots of comments from
Oh,
various
you want me to bring
billionaires.
this one up?
Oh, I
You
do
want
want
me
you
to
to bring this one up.
you
Bring
want
it
me to
up
bring this
because
one
I
up?
think that this
Okay.
is a perfect example.
So, y'all, while we were comparing cheese prices at Aldi, Alex Karp, who is the CEO of, remind me, NVIDIA,
Palantir.
Palantir, sorry, oops, not NVIDIA, other one.
Yeah.
And he on live national television, CNBC, he made a comment about how the AI revolution will affect liberal leaning, humanities educated women more than men. And this, of course, sent me into a tailspin. But tell us a little bit about those optics and what that actually was, Joanna, from your view and your experience in being in politics.
Yeah, so I think when you sent this to me, my first reaction was LOL. But let me give you the reasons for that. So this quote is a perfect example of why we really need to think critically about the messenger and why the messenger matters. And as we'll talk about more later, why getting more voices into this debate really matters. So, Alex Karp runs Palantir. It's a company that is actively selling its services to the Trump administration, which, as we all know, I think mostly we've got Americans on the line, but I think it's anyone who pays attention to American politics knows that the Trump administration gets a lot of its political power might be true, right? In the sense that like we don't actually know what's going to happen with AI, but it's also a really good sales pitch. And I think there's a couple of other things to highlight here is that there are other AI leaders who've actually said the exact opposite. The head of NVIDIA has said that AI could lead to a revenge of the humanities because LLMs are really good at doing a lot of technical tasks, including coding, that have traditionally been done by non-humanities majors who are more often men. So I think you've got some voices out there who are saying exactly the opposite. The other is that, if you look at the history from globalization, what happened with the decline of manufacturing in the US, it had a very real and very truly negative impact on a lot of working class men. But I wouldn't necessarily say that that translated to a reduction in their political power. I would just say that if that were the case, then we probably would have a different president in the US right now. And so, again, we can't say any of these things with certainty. But I think this was just, I saw that and I thought, this is why it really matters when you think about this to take a step back and really think critically about who is telling you what and why they might be saying it when it comes to AI.
So when you don't see the logic, look for the interest, is what my father always told me.
Mhm.
So let's talk about the logic here.
Yeah, let's go into data. So I hesitated to put up any chart here, but I think visuals really matter. And I want to start out by saying that nobody, no matter how confidently they pronounce it, can tell you exactly how AI is going to affect the labor market. Really measured, nonpartisan researchers will tell you that all the research is really in the first inning. But I think that being said, the reason I am showing this chart is because I think that it is directionally right to our best knowledge, based on what we know now about where AI may bring the most disruption and about where its capabilities currently stand. And what you'll see on this chart, so the blue is theoretical AI coverage. So this is like the number of tasks within and occupations within these fields that theoretically an LLM could do now. And what you see is a lot of overlap with knowledge work that can be done on the computer, right? So software engineering, lots of media, finance, lawyers, a lot of overlap with what AI can theoretically do now. The red is for these researchers, which, to my point around agenda, are attached to Anthropic. But again, I think this is, based on what we know, probably directionally right. The red is an estimate of where AI is currently being used. So again, much smaller than the blue. And so looking at this again, I think gives a good sense of what types of professions might be in play, but there's a number of reasons that's really imperfect. So the first is that we have really good data on occupations, on jobs. We don't have great data overall on skills and tasks. And I think that within most occupations, it's fair to say that AI is probably not going to replace everything that somebody doing that job does, but rather change what people in that profession do and what skills are required, right? So if I think about my job as a consultant, right now AI is doing a lot of really great basic research for me, but it's not interfacing with my clients. So that's one thing to consider, and that's just a real limitation in the data. And then secondly, just because AI can do something doesn't mean that we'll want it to, or that it will be able to overcome all of the barriers to adoption that are sort of grounded in the way that our institutions operate and in the way that these fields operate. So anyway, Abby, I invite
Oh,
you for
well, I've
questions
been
here too
waiting for
before I
this.
go.
I've
Go
been
ahead, two
waiting for this
examples.
moment. I'm not a mathematician, but Joanna, as a labor economist, can you tell us this looks really lopsided, right? It's heavy on one side of loss, and these represent potentially jobs, which then equal wages,
Mhm.
equal earnings, money, right? So who is paying for the other side of this if one side is no longer having money?
Yeah, so this is a fantastic point that I think our political leaders and even people running companies really have not given a lot of thought to. Just as one example, a few weeks ago, there was a Substack article that went viral that was basically a science fiction article. It was essentially like, this is what could happen with AI, if it runs rampant through the economy and eliminates lots of jobs and made this point that it's a real problem for our economy if lots of people don't actually have work. And what happened was that the Dow dropped 800 points that day on the basis of essentially a science fiction piece, a piece of speculative fiction. And the reason is that like people suddenly realize that right, if a whole bunch of people are out of work, then who's buying the products from all the other people? So I don't think that that extreme scenario where it was looking at 2 years out is going to become true. But I think that's a really great point. But I think going to the next slide, I had wanted to highlight two occupations as to why how this plays out could be a lot more complicated than folks think right now. So I want to talk about two very different occupations. So on one side, travel agents, and on the other side, radiologists. So, a little bit of history. With the advent of online booking, as probably you all are aware, travel agents declined dramatically in number as people, probably, and all of you, can easily do simple routine tasks, like, say, booking a flight from New York to Chicago. And what happened is there was a decline in the number of travel agents, but the industry evolved significantly. And this is now identified as a potentially growing occupation by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And what happened is that travel agents became travel advisors or travel designers or travel strategists, where they really specialize in complex trips where local knowledge and judgment about what will lead to the best experience really matters. So, basically routine tasks became commoditized. We could all book our simple flights by ourselves. But if I want a really special honeymoon, right, then I might be turning to one of these travel designers because I need a human I can trust to make sure that this turns out the way that I want it to. So that's one example. Another one, radiologists. So AI has been deployed in radiology to help read images and sort of, improve that task for many years. So much so that as early as 2016, leading expert predicted that radiologists would basically be extinct, within a decade, perhaps pretty quickly. But today there are more radiologists than there were in 2016 in the US. And so what's the reason for that? So one is just demand. We have an aging population, which means that there are more people that need the services of radiologists. But secondly, I think what the analysis also missed is that radiologists don't just read images, okay? So the AI can really help them do that. But they also talk to patients about, what they saw within that image. They talk to surgeons and other physicians. They help to develop a treatment plan. They are trusted advisors, right, to people who are going through potentially getting a really tough diagnosis and at a difficult point in their life. And so what the AI has done in that case is help to make the radiologists that are there better at their jobs and more productive. And so I think you'll see some themes here that, I think it's fair to say, and there's evidence this is happening, AI is automating basic tasks, but sort of more complex skills, human judgment, creativity, and critically trust are likely still going to matter. And even in fields where there's massive disruption, so for example, the travel industry, there is opportunity for people who really think creatively about where this technology might go and how they might position themselves.
There's a cultural trend that's called human in the loop, right?
Mhm.
And the thinking is from people way smarter. Actually, no, we're pretty goddamn smart. Excuse my language. By our peers have called this a human in the loop, which is a human premium. So the more systems like AI become uh, prevalent in our lives, the more we will crave humans. And
Mhm.
so we'll move on to the next question here, Joanna. Thanks.
Yeah. So, yes, humanity really matters. And so, let's say you're in a position of leadership today within your company, your organization. What can you do? What are principles that can guide you? And so, I think really two core principles are transparency and engagement. So, to the extent that you can, being transparent about how you intend to use AI, for what purposes, and for whom. And then engagement, not leaving your employees behind, but actually involving them in the process, because pretty sure that they're going to have really good ideas about how this technology can be used. But you also have to do it in the right way. I think right now there's a lot of really depressing dystopian stories about workers effectively being asked to train AI bots that are going to replace them. Don't do that. And if we go to the next slide, I think we can talk about sort of the other paths that this can take. So I think, you are not going to be able to give good advice to your employees or really be able to guide your organization unless you have a sense of the path that you want AI adoption to take within your organization. And this is just, a little bit of a reductive thought experiment about the paths that can be taken. So let's say that AI does improve worker productivity, and there's some evidence that it does in some cases. There's other evidence that in other cases it does the opposite. It makes us less productive. But let's say that it does improve productivity. If you're looking at your workforce and your business, there's a number of choices you can make, right? You can choose to achieve the same outputs, so do the same amount of work with fewer workers, in which case you're going to reduce your workforce and you're going to, I think responsibly and ethically should be thinking about how to help those workers reskill and have a off ramp into new careers. So that is one option. You can also choose to do more with the same number of workers. That I think, again, may require reskilling because that doing more might not necessarily mean that the workers are doing the same things that they were before. I think that's also, frankly, a recipe for burnout. And I think that that's what we're seeing is that, as AI is deployed, workers are doing more and more, not necessarily work that they feel is productive. And, it really does create this risk of, a risk to worker well-being. And then on the flip side, I think looking at sort of what the positive potential for this could be is that a company could think about AI and how it would allow it to expand into new markets with new offerings, do new things with more workers, right? In that case, I think that's one where you can really envision an engagement strategy where you're going out to the employees in your company, bringing them along and thinking through how do we evolve? How do we create brighter horizons for everyone? That will also probably require reskilling because what we are seeing is that in that scenario, you would imagine that AI would still probably be taking over many of these entry-level tasks. That means that like a lot of workers would need to come into positions at a higher level of competency, and that also has to be planned for. And so I think, for leaders on this call, for others, I think that many folks are very much at the beginning, but at least starting with the principles of what matters to you, what matters to your company and your culture, and working with your employees on it in an honest and transparent way is a great place to start.
Joanna, the I think we all likely have memories. I mean, they're foundational memories of our work life.
Hmm.
I mean, I met my husband through work, right? I mean, best friends, like they were our family in a lot of ways. We were raised with them. We moved to new cities with them. I mean, we went through traumas together. Like that part of this human experience is so critical to at least that's what I think of, right? And I
Hmm.
just the first pathway feels very scary to me. The other two, I like those better, but the first one feels like we're just missing a key piece of life that we all
Hmm.
benefited from and we all learned from, and right?
Well, right. I mean, Abby, we wouldn't be here today if we hadn't met at work, right?
That's
So
true.
I think,
That's true. See?
yeah. So yes, I mean, I think certainly several of my best friends I have met at work. And I think, getting back to this point around humanities degrees, I think one of the things I worry about the most is that, many people, not everyone, but many people derive a lot of their meaning and purpose from work. It gives them a lot more than a paycheck. And if that goes away, how do we spend our time? What does that mean? I have a public policy degree. I also have an English degree. And I think those humanities degrees are going to be really important in this world in which work is potentially very disrupted. So, so yeah, it is scary. It is potentially scary. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. But I also think that from what I'm seeing in the policy landscape, what I'm seeing in the dialogue, there hasn't been nearly enough attention to what this means for meaning.
What this means for meeting. Joanna mentioned she's a writer. She's a beautiful writer, and you should all follow her on Substack.
Thanks,
Um,
Abby.
Next, please go ahead.
So taking your power back. So what does that mean? So I want to start out by saying, as I think we've talked about a lot here, a lot of the narrative around what to do with AI has been about what we as individuals can do. And that matters. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But this is fundamentally not an individual problem. What we do with AI, how it is deployed at work, how it is deployed in our schools, how it is used by government, this is a collective challenge. And this is where, your voice really matters. Not just at like the national level, but frankly at the local level too. As many, localities within the US, cities, state governments think about these tools and how to use them, we need collective solutions. And I know that Sam has offerings around helping people come up with a plan around civic engagement. I would really encourage that here. And I would, in your daily life, resist messaging that puts this all on you as a worker. As I said, even the best labor market experts can't tell you what's going to happen in the labor market when it comes to AI. The people who are developing these systems don't even fully know how they work. So how can we expect the individual worker to, have a crystal ball and know exactly what they're supposed to do? So that is number one. Number two, this is not the first technological disruption that the US economy has faced. And we don't need to throw everything we know about career management or workforce development out the window because of this new technology. Many of the same principles apply. And so if we think about an individual and career management, number one is ownership, is sort of understanding where you are in your career. If you're in a position of authority within your company to take an active role in assessing how you're going to use AI and for what purpose and for whom. I think secondly, it's really important that you use these tools, which, is good and bad. But I've spent a lot of time experimenting with them and, that has helped me make decisions about what I want Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini to do in my working life and what I prefer that they don't do, and what they're good at and what they're not good at. I also think that this is really a moment, just because of the potential diversity of outcomes here, to really think about contingency plans and experimentation. So if you love your career, you want to stay in it, start getting up to date on how AI is being used within that field and how it might affect you. But maybe also think about what other paths could look like for your life, for your career. just because we don't know what's going to happen, and it's always good to have contingency plans. And then I think the final principle, which again, this is not rocket science because, as I said, we don't need to throw everything out the window, is to network, is to just constantly be in conversation with people about what they are seeing in the field that you're in or ones you want to go to, what they're seeing in the research, who's having a voice, and what that might mean for you and your career. So again, that is certainly, I think, not rocket science. It probably sounds pretty standard to folks who do help people manage their careers, but that's intentional because I think that the same principles still apply even in an AI-driven economy.
And also just learning, right? To add to
Yeah.
this, like learning and forming a little opinion, and a thought or thoughts about how AI, what you feel about AI, right?
Mhm.
And you're entitled to that. And if you don't have that opinion, someone will form it for you. And our fear is that the people who are forming the opinions they're old men. And
Well, they're men at least.
they're
All of them old, but
men. They're
yeah.
not necessarily old, and we're not ages here at SAM, but they're men, and they're kind of crazy. They're pretty. They're kind of nuts. So we need opinions. We need to know how we feel. We need to learn and speak up as well.
Awesome.
So
Well,
yeah.
see if you
What
got any questions.
questions do you have for us? We'd love to promote you. If you'd like to speak, you can raise your hand. We'll promote you to speaker. You can ask aloud. You can drop questions in the chat. I have some from folks who weren't able to join us, so I can go to those as well. In fact, maybe I'll just start with one of those as people get questions prepped up. Uh, I read about poor AI performance and low ROI, but I don't understand why they keep pushing it.
I read, oh, it's a somebody who's hearing that AI is not really delivering, but it's
It's not
still,
delivering. It's not all that it's
yeah.
cracked up to be, but like companies keep pushing it. Why is that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that are going on here. So as I said, the research is mixed, right? That in some cases again, it's all early days, right? Is improving productivity. Got a lot of reports about, really the utility of AI, doing a lot of great coding work, as one example, and helping folks be able to do more. Me being able to vibe code things on my own. But I think that what we are seeing is that it's taking a lot more for the models to get more effective. And that's just sort of like baked into how they are developed. I think also what is happening is that a lot of companies are using AI as an excuse to reduce their workforce, because it is paying off in their stock price. But that might not necessarily be exactly why they are engaging in those layoffs. I think that there's good work that has been done here by the Yale Budget Lab and others, sort of like showing this is a complicated picture. Some companies, for example, really ramped up their hiring during and immediately after the pandemic, and some of this may just be a reaction to realizing that they needed to rework their workforce and it was no longer fit for the current moment. But they're saying AI because the market is rewarding them. So I think there's complicated reasons for why companies are pushing this. As I said, I think this is again a matter for us as individuals to engage collectively on how we want AI to be used, and also to think critically about the tools themselves and how they're being used within the organizations that we're in and how we're using them, in our daily lives.
Another question, and I wasn't sure about whether or not to include it, but I think you might be the right one for with the
Oh
answer.
no, okay.
Um, can LLMs or AI now feel things? Do they have emotions now? I read an article. This is
Uh, so I am not qualified to answer that question, I would say.
so we'll save it for the next one.
We
Okay.
will save it for the next. We will definitely save it for the next one. I'm not sure anyone could answer that question or yeah, should
Should
broach the
answer that
subject.
question, right?
Should answer that question. What I will say is that we all do need to be careful about our emotional reactions to AI and in using the tools that are out there. I think that what we have in our country right now, particularly among young people, is a real crisis of connection and a crisis of loneliness. And I think that these AI tools, as we have seen in some really tragic cases, really can exacerbate that problem. And so I think this is something I think a lot as a parent, about, how children should be interacting with these tools, if at all, how they should be being used in schools, how technology in general, right, should be showing up in our lives. And so, I can't talk about AI and whether it's feeling emotions, but I do think we should all be aware of how it is playing on our emotions and those of the people that we care about.
So our next question is around regulation. It's it it's not as dry as it sounds, I promise you, because Joanna's going to break it down in a very easy to understand way for us non-policy folks. But how do we regulate AI? Is regulation a path forward for to prevent some of these things that we're seeing
Mhm.
happening, or what could happen in the future?
Yeah. So regulation, I think, is absolutely a path forward. I think what we're seeing now is, as in many cases, the European Union is really taking the lead in terms of regulation with the EU AI Act, which is being implemented as we speak. I think it's really too early to say how successful that will be, but I'm hoping that a lot of lessons will be learned. I think there's a real tension here when it comes to regulation, in that there are some states within the US that have decided they want to be early movers and really put limits around the uses of AI, or at least, transparency clauses, various things to make sure, I think it's a minimum bar. You should know if you're interacting with an AI system or not. It shouldn't be pretending to be a human when it's an AI bot. But I think there's a tension between what can be done by individual states and really what should be done at the national level, so that there's sort of a coherent framework that applies, in all cases. That's not something I think we're going to get anytime soon. But I think from a simple perspective, again, how you can influence regulation or the use of AI is by talking to your state leaders, to your national leaders, and just talk in simple terms that anyone will understand about where you think AI should be used and where it shouldn't be used, how it should be used, for whom, and where it should be, where it just shouldn't go. And I think that's gonna be really important, particularly in the US, hopefully in the future, to help get us better frameworks that get us past sort of like the Wild West that we're in right now.
And most Americans think that all of the decisions are made at the top with the big guy who shall remain nameless. That's not true. A lot of the work, the actual work, happens at the state and local level. And this is where your voice is really important. I also think about data centers and what comes into your community, right?
Mhm.
Like these are other things that we don't have time to talk about today, but for next time. Joanna, we're out of time. Y'all, thank you so much for being here. We hope you enjoyed. We hope you feel a little bit more prepared and informed, perhaps a little bit more optimistic. We'll send the recording and some resources out to you afterwards. We really appreciate the support, and we'll see you on SAM. And thanks again, Joanna, for being here. Round of applause. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. It was a total pleasure.
Thank you.
Great to see you, Abby.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.